Welcome to Lead Empowered TV. I am your host, Nathan Mitchell, and today's episode is going to be a little bit different. Instead of bringing on a guest like I normally do, I really want to tackle a question that's been at the center of the leadership development work that I've been doing for nearly 25 years. Why do so many organizations struggle with disengagement and underperformance, even when they have talented people on their teams? I have seen this play out over and over and over again with the organizations that I've worked with across corporate retail, higher education, and even small business. Leaders with good intentions, teams full of potential, and yet something in one way or another just isn't clicking. People feel misunderstood, communication breaks down, burnout creeps in, and more often than not, great employees don't leave the work. They leave the leadership. And that reality is exactly why I founded my company, Lead Empowered. My focus is to help small and mid-sized organizations build high-performing, burnout-resistance cultures by developing more self-aware, confident leaders and teams that are more aligned. Because here's what I know to be true. When leaders grow in awareness and they lead with intention, everything begins to shift. Teams start to feel heard and valued. Communication gets more clear, alignment strengthens, and performance follows. So in today's episode, I'm going to walk through how I think about leadership and culture, what's actually causing breakdowns inside of organizations, and more importantly, what you can do to start fixing it. If you've ever felt like your team is capable of more, or like you were working too hard just to keep things moving in the right direction, I promise you this conversation is for you today. So let's get into it. The first question that I want to answer is, what's the biggest reason that teams become disengaged, even when their leaders have good intentions? And I think this really comes down to a gap between intention and impact. Most leaders that I work with, they genuinely care about their people. They want to create great workplace cultures. They want their teams to succeed. But somewhere along the way, that intention doesn't translate into the day-to-day experience of the team. And what fills that gap is usually a lack of clarity and consistent communication. When people don't know what is expected of them, when they are unsure how success is defined, or when they don't feel seen or understood by their leader, disengagement begins to creep in, and not because they don't care, but because they don't feel connected to the bigger picture or confident in where they stand inside the organization. And over time, that can lead to frustration, that can lead to burnout, that can lead to withdrawal. And eventually you've got talented people doing the bare minimum or leaving your organization altogether. So for me, disengagement isn't really a motivation problem. It's a leadership clarity problem. When leaders get clear, and I mean clear in expectations, clear in communication, and clear in how they show up consistently, engagement tends to follow. And the second question I want to answer for you in today's episode is, where do you see communication breaking down most often? In my professional opinion, the most common breakdown that I see is leaders assuming that what they said is what was actually heard, and more importantly, what was understood. Communication just isn't about delivering a message. It's really about ensuring alignment. And that's where things can begin to fall apart. Leaders will share a vision once and assume everyone's on the same page. They'll give direction, but not context. Or they'll avoid the difficult conversation entirely because they don't like conflict. And what happens is people start filling in the gaps on their own. And that's where misalignment grows quietly at first. You have different interpretations, different priorities, different assumptions, and before long, the team is pulling in completely different directions. Another big one is feedback. Either it's too vague to be helpful, or it only shows up when something goes wrong. Strong communication really needs to be consistent, it needs to be clear, and it needs to be two-way. It invites dialogue, not just compliance. And the best leaders that I've worked with, they don't just communicate more, they communicate better, they communicate more effectively. And what I mean by that is they check for understanding. They create space for members of their team to ask questions, and they're not afraid to lean into the conversations that actually move the team forward. The third question I want to address for you today is what's actually causing leaders themselves to feel stuck or burned out. And a lot of this comes from leaders carrying more than they were ever meant to carry alone. At the end of the day, they feel responsible for everything, the results, the people, the problems, and they start operating from a place of pressure instead of a place of purpose. And what I see often is leaders trying to compensate for gaps on their team by doing more of the work themselves. And that includes more decisions, more problem solving, more involvement in things they should be empowering other people to do. And over time, that becomes exhausting, not only for the leader themselves, but also for the team members who are on the other side of that. Another piece is a lack of self-awareness. And I don't mean in a negative way, but simply that many leaders haven't had the space or the tools to really understand how they lead under pressure, how they communicate, or how their behaviors are impacting their team. So they stay stuck in patterns that aren't really serving them or others at all. And burnout isn't just about an organization or a team's workload. It's really about misalignment. When how you're leading doesn't align with how you're wired internally or what your team actually needs from you, it can create friction. And friction over time leads to fatigue, burnout, employee disengagement, all the above. So when leaders step back, build awareness, and really start leading more intentionally, and that means delegating more effectively, communicating more clearly, and trusting their team, things begin to feel lighter, not just because the role is easy, but because it's finally aligned the way that it needs to be. The fourth question that I want to address today on this topic of going from burnout to buy-in is when you step into an organization, what's the first thing you look at to understand their culture? I always start with alignment, specifically how well the leadership team is aligned with each other and how clearly that alignment is translated to the rest of the organization. Because culture isn't what's written on the wall. It's what's experienced in the day-to-day interactions between leaders and their teams. So I'm looking at a few key things right away. Are expectations clear? Not just at the top, but across every level inside the organization. Is communication consistent, or does it vary depending upon the leader? And maybe most importantly, do people feel safe speaking up? Do they feel heard? I'll often ask team members the same question in different ways just to see how consistent their answers are. Because inconsistency tells me that there's a breakdown somewhere in alignment or communication inside the organization or on the team. And what I've found is that most culture issues are actually leader alignment problems in disguise. When leaders are aligned in how they communicate, what they prioritize, and how they hold people accountable, it really creates stability for the entire organization. And from there, culture becomes something that's reinforced naturally and it doesn't seem forced. The fifth question that I often get asked is, what's one thing someone can start doing immediately to create a more empowered workplace culture? If I had to give you just one starting point, it would be this. Start creating more clarity through intentional conversations. And that sounds simple, but it's really incredibly powerful. So sit down with your team members and make sure that they're clear on three things. What's expected of them, how is success measured, and how their role connects to the bigger picture inside of the organization. Because at the end of the day, your team members, they want to be helpful. They want to contribute. They want you to empower them to help move the organization forward in a positive way. And don't just tell them about the big picture. Ask them to reflect it back to you, because that's where real alignment happens. From there, create a rhythm of ongoing conversations, not just updates on tasks, but I mean real dialogue. What is working, what's not working, where they need your support, etc. Because empowerment doesn't come from giving people more freedom. It comes from giving them the clarity and confidence to take ownership. When people know what's expected, when they feel supported and understand the impact they're making, they naturally want to step up and help out. And that's where you don't have to force engagement because you've really created an environment where people and the organization itself can thrive. And that really happens with one conversation at a time. And before I wrap up, this episode, I want to give you a simple next step, especially if you're a leader, business owner, team leader, etc., that is serious about growing as a leader and improving the culture of your team. One of the most powerful places to start is with self-awareness, because the way that you communicate and even the way you respond under pressure, all of that is shaped by how you are wired. And that's where the Five Voices framework comes in. It's literally a practical tool that helps you understand your natural leadership voice, how you tend to show up in a team, leading a team, and just as importantly, where you might unintentionally be creating friction or causing blind spots. And what I've seen over and over again is that when leaders gain this level of self-awareness, communication starts to improve almost immediately. Conversations get more clear, teams feel understood, and alignment becomes a lot easier to build. So if you're looking for a starting point, I would encourage you to take the Five Voices assessment. It's quick, it's insightful, and it really gives you a language to better understand both yourself and the people that you lead. As you'll see here, I just put a QR code on the screen. All you have to do is just scan that, and it will take you directly to my platform where you can take the assessment entirely free. So take it, reflect on it, and if you want to go deeper from there, I'd love to have a conversation with you about it. Email me at nathan@leadempowered.com. You can also visit me on the web at leadempowered.com and learn more about the coaching and training and development and academies that we offer to help organizations like yours move from burnout to buy-in and ultimately create an empowered workplace culture. So when you take the Five Voices assessment, it's a small step, but it can really create a powerful shift in how you lead as a business owner or leader. So as we wrap up, here's what I want to leave you with. Most organizations, they don't struggle because of a lack of talent. They struggle because of a lack of alignment, clarity, and intentional leadership. And the truth is, culture isn't something that just happens. It's something you create through how you communicate, how you show up, and how you lead your people every single day. If you're seeing disengagement, burnout, or frustration on your team, it's not a sign to push harder. It's really a sign to lead differently. When you grow in self-awareness, when you create clarity, and when you empower your people, everything begins to shift. And if this conversation, has resonated with you today, what I've shared on this solo interview, so to speak, for the first time on Lead Empowered TV, I just really encourage you to take one step this week, just one thing that moves your team forward toward better communication and stronger alignment. And if you're ready to go deeper, I'd love to connect and support you in building the kind of culture that your people actually want to be a part of. So thank you so much for tuning in to this special edition of Lead Empowered TV. I hope that it has delivered a lot of value to you. I hope it has piqued your interest and made you possibly ask some questions that you hadn't thought about before. So love to see you. Love to help you out in any way that I can. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day. We'll see you next week.